We are going to be skipping ahead to lesson 15 on bias in a sample or a sentence. So you'll be doing pages 74 and 75 today. The difference between a census and a sample is that when you take a census, you are surveying an entire population. For a sample, you are only surveying a part of a population. So this doesn't mean that every census needs to take in the population of the entire world. If I were to take a census of the class to find out your favorite flavor of ice cream, I would be asking every student in the class. That would still count as a census. If I decided to just choose 5 of you and whichever type won, I would assume that was the favorite and maybe buy that for the class, then that would be a sample because I'm only asking a part of the population instead of asking the entire population. The first question will ask you, would you use a census or a sample to find out, and then they'll give you a scenario. For example, the first one is, which movie your 5 friends want to watch? So some of the things to keep in mind when you're deciding should I use a census or a sample are, do you need responses from the whole population? Or is it okay to only have answers from a part of the population? The second thing to keep in mind is, how easy is it to get a sample of everyone? So is it easy to ask the whole group? So this might be for something that's smaller, it might be easy enough to get a census. For something that is much bigger and it's hard to talk to the whole group, you might want to use a sample. In your first option, they ask you which movie your 5 friends want to watch. Now, it's probably fairly important for everyone to get a say if you're deciding with just 5 people, and it's easy to ask everyone in a group of 5. So you probably would go for a census. Whereas if you were trying to get an answer to which movie the school would want to watch if we were going to the movie theater for a field trip, it might be challenging to get the whole population. You might just want to do a sample of students from each of the different grades. When you get to groups that are even bigger than a school, like an entire city or an entire population of how like a disease affects them, then you're probably going to go more towards a sample where you don't have time to talk to everyone. So when you are developing a sample, you have to think about who you are asking to answer if you're not talking to the entire population and what impacts that could have on your results. For example, you're going to have a question for number 2 that a principal's trying to figure out if school should start and end 30 minutes earlier every day. Now, she has a couple options. She could ask the first 50 kids that are at school in the morning, or she could ask 5 students from each class. So if you think of asking the first 50 kids, that might be problematic because the kids that are there first are probably the ones that are okay with it starting earlier. If you asked all of the students that are late in the morning, you might get a very different answer. Asking 5 students from each class, this might give a slightly more balanced perspective from all of the different grades and isn't just targeting the ones that are the first ones there in the morning. So that's something to keep in mind. So you can use that information to decide which sample you think will be more accurate to what the whole school thinks, a better representation of the whole school's opinion. Now, for question C, in number 2, they're going to ask you, if there's 500 people in the school, how many do you think will want school to start and finish a half hour earlier? So I'm just making up some numbers here. If you surveyed 50 people and 23 said they wanted it to start early, to figure out about how many you would expect of the 500 to think the same thing, we need to figure out how to get from 50 to 500 because that's going to be our whole population. So to get from 50 to 500, we need to multiply it by 10. So we would multiply our numerator by 10 as well, and that would give us 230. So if 23 out of 50 people said yes on the sample, if you have a good unbiased sample, you would expect about 230 out of 500 people to answer similarly if you surveyed everyone in the whole population. Two of the new terms that you're going to learn in this lesson are a representative sample, which is similar to the whole population, or a biased sample, which is not similar to the whole population. So for example, when we looked at our question above, asking the first 50 kids, that might be biased. That might not be similar to the whole population, whereas 5 random kids from each class might be more representative of the whole population. If we have a biased sample, then we would say that that question has bias. It doesn't seem like it's fair. Question 4 is going to give you several situations where you have to decide if the sample is biased or representative. So for example, in question A, they've got a school that's grades 1 to 8 that's planning a party and they're choosing a board game. So when they try to figure out the most popular board game in the school, if they ask 40 grade 7 and 8 students, that will probably be biased because it won't represent all of the grades in the school. Whereas if they ask 5 students from each grade, they're more likely to get ideas from all of the grades and have some that are geared towards the younger students. So you'll have to look at each question and see, why might this be problematic and biased? So question 5 will give you a situation where they have a question, should we build a new hockey arena, swimming pool, or a library? And then sometimes people, when they're taking a survey, will actually go to a specific location and ask everyone that passes them. So they're going to ask you which location would be best. Should they set up at a beach, a bookstore, a professional hockey game, or a shopping mall? So the goal is to make an unbiased or a representative sample, to not choose a location that will be obviously connected to a specific answer in the question. Because maybe most people at a bookstore will want a new library. Maybe they won't, but there's more odds that there will be a connection that way. So keep that in mind as you are answering. If I do too much work going question by question for the rest of these, I'm kind of handing the answers to you a little bit more. So instead, I'm just going to list some areas that you can think about when avoiding bias, so you can use the information you know to answer the rest of the questions. So one of the things in avoiding bias is not to just ask your friend. If you have the choice between choosing all the people from one class, or if it's going to affect the whole school, choosing from different classes, I would recommend that. It's also helpful to randomize the people that you're surveying. So not just to come up with a list of your friends, but to maybe grab a list and choose every 4th person so that it's a little bit more random. Make sure your scales are also realistic. So if you're asking how much time people spend doing something, if you're asking how many minutes a day they read and you're giving them the smallest answer is 0 to 8 hours, well, most people are reading for less than 8 hours. So that could be biased as well. The final thing to be aware of is your questions shouldn't promote a specific answer. So if the question you're asking is kind of showing that you're in favor or that you're not, the results might be biased, right? If you said, like, do you like the disgusting color of baby poop green? Chances are people are going to say no. If you say, do you like green? they might have a different answer, right? So these are just some of the things to keep in mind. Make sure to comment afterwards on Fresh Grade whether you need any help or whether you are good to go.